What would you do if someone looked at you and said, "You have no imagination"? What if they fired you because they believed you lacked creativity? Would you accept their judgment? Would you give up on your dream? Or would you spend the rest of your life proving them wrong? Because one man did, and because he refused to quit, billions of people around the world know his name. His name was Walt Disney. And this isn't just the story of a businessman. This is the story of a dreamer, a man who lost everything, a man who went bankrupt, a man who was rejected, a man who was told he wasn't talented enough. And yet, he built one of the greatest entertainment empires in human history. Imagine sitting alone in a small office. The lights are dim, the bills are piling up, your business is collapsing, and everyone around you believes your dream is over. What would you do? Would you stop? Would you accept reality? Or would you continue believing in something nobody else could see? Because that's exactly what Walt Disney did. Walter Elias Disney was born in Chicago in 1901. He wasn't born rich, he wasn't born famous, and he certainly wasn't born successful. He was simply a boy who loved to draw. Imagine that. Before there was Disney, before there was Mickey Mouse, before there were theme parks, movies, and magic, there was simply a young boy with a pencil and a dream. But life wasn't magical. Not at first. Walt grew up in a family that struggled financially. He worked long hours from a young age. He delivered newspapers before sunrise. He experienced exhaustion, responsibility, pressure. And perhaps that's where he learned one of the greatest lessons of his life. Dreams require sacrifice. As Walt grew older, he became obsessed with art, not because anyone encouraged him, not because anyone promised success, because he loved creating. He loved imagining worlds that didn't exist, characters that nobody had ever seen, stories that nobody had ever told. Have you ever had a dream that nobody else understood? A dream that people laughed at? A dream so ridiculous that even you sometimes doubted it? That was Walt Disney. He believed in things that didn't exist yet, and that's what made him different. But being different isn't always rewarded. In fact, it often brings pain. As a young man, Walt worked for a newspaper. He hoped this would be the beginning of his career, the beginning of his success. Instead, something devastating happened. He was fired. And according to one famous account, he was told he lacked imagination and had no good ideas. Imagine hearing that. The man who would eventually create one of the greatest creative empires in human history was told he wasn't creative enough. What would you have done? Would you have believed them? Would you have accepted their judgment? Many people would have. Many people do. But Walt Disney made a different choice. He chose to continue, because sometimes the people who doubt you simply cannot see what you are capable of becoming. And perhaps the most dangerous thing in life isn't failure. It's believing the people who tell you you can't succeed. So, Walt kept dreaming. He kept drawing. He kept building. He started his own company. He believed that this time would be different. He believed that this time he would finally succeed. But life had another lesson waiting for him, a lesson so painful that it would destroy almost everything he had built. And for a moment, Walt Disney would stand on the edge of giving up forever. To be continued.
Imagine building your dream with everything you have, every hour, every dollar, every ounce of hope. And then one day, you lose it all. Would you survive? Because that's exactly what happened to Walt Disney. After being fired and rejected, Walt refused to quit. He moved to Kansas City. He worked tirelessly. He started a small animation company called Laugh-O-Gram. And for the first time in his life, it felt like his dreams were becoming real. He hired artists. He created cartoons. He imagined a future that nobody else could see. Can you imagine that feeling? The feeling that you're finally getting closer. The feeling that maybe all your suffering was worth it. Walt believed he was building the future. But dreams are expensive, and reality can be cruel. The company struggled financially. Bills piled up, money disappeared, and eventually the nightmare happened. Laugh-O-Gram went bankrupt. Everything Walt had worked for collapsed. Imagine walking into your office one final time. The desks are empty. The lights are off. The dream is dead. What would you do? Would you give up? Would you finally accept that everyone else was right? Many people would have, but Walt Disney wasn't many people. He was broke, he was exhausted, he was devastated, and yet he still had one thing: hope. Sometimes hope is all we have, and sometimes it's enough. Walt made one of the most important decisions of his life. He decided to leave everything behind and move to Hollywood. Think about that. No money, no successful company, no guarantee of success. Just a suitcase, a few belongings, and a dream. Have you ever started over? Really started over? When everyone else thought you were crazy? That's what Walt Disney did. He arrived in California with almost nothing, but he arrived with something more powerful than money. He arrived with belief. And that's when everything changed. Together with his brother Roy, Walt started another company, another dream, another chance. And this time, success finally seemed possible. Walt created a character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The cartoons became popular. People loved them. For the first time in years, Walt Disney wasn't just surviving, he was succeeding. Can you imagine how that felt? After bankruptcy, after rejection, after humiliation, to finally believe that your dream had survived. But the worst moment of Walt Disney's life was still coming, because one day, during a business trip to New York, Walt discovered something that shattered him. He had lost Oswald, not creatively, legally. The rights to the character had been taken from him, and even worse, many of his own animators had left him. Imagine that moment. You're on a train ride home. You have lost your company, lost your character, lost your team, lost the future you had imagined. The train moves through the darkness. The windows shake. The world outside is silent. And for a moment, you wonder if this is the end. Would you continue? Would you still believe in yourself? Most people wouldn't. Most people would surrender. But on that train ride, broken and exhausted, Walt Disney did something extraordinary. He imagined a mouse, a small mouse, a character nobody had ever seen before, a character who would change his life, a character who would change entertainment forever. His name was Mickey Mouse, and nobody, not even Walt Disney himself, could have imagined what would happen next. To be continued.
Imagine losing everything. Your company, your employees, your most successful creation, your future, and then sitting alone on a train deciding to dream again. Could you do it? Because that's exactly what Walt Disney did. The year was 1928. Walt Disney was returning from New York to California. He was devastated. He had lost Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, the character he had spent years building, the character he believed would change his life. Gone. Imagine looking out of a train window, the landscape passing by, the sound of the wheels echoing through the night, and realizing that everything you've worked for has disappeared. For most people, that would have been the end. But for Walt Disney, it was the beginning. Because during that journey, Walt imagined a new character, a small mouse, not powerful, not scary, not impressive, just a mouse. Think about how ridiculous that sounds. A man loses everything, and his solution is a cartoon mouse. Can you imagine telling someone that? I lost my business, but don't worry, I have an idea about a mouse. Most people would laugh. Most people did. But great visionaries often see what others cannot. When Walt returned to California, he shared his idea. He named the character Mickey Mouse, and together with his small team, he began creating again. Have you ever noticed that the people who change the world often have to rebuild themselves first? Because that's exactly what Walt was doing. He wasn't just creating a character, he was rebuilding his belief. He was rebuilding his future. He was rebuilding himself. Then something unbelievable happened. Walt Disney made a decision that would change entertainment forever. He decided to create a cartoon with synchronized sound. Today, that might not sound extraordinary, but at the time, it was revolutionary. People told him it wouldn't work. People told him audiences wouldn't care. People told him he was wasting his time and money. Have you heard that before? It's impossible. It will never work. Nobody wants that. History is full of people who were told those exact words, and history often proves those people wrong. In 1928, Walt released Steamboat Willie. The world met Mickey Mouse, and everything changed. Audiences were amazed. They laughed. They cheered. They had never seen anything like it. For the first time in years, Walt wasn't fighting to survive. He was changing history. Can you imagine that feeling? To go from bankruptcy and failure to creating something that millions of people love. To go from losing everything to discovering your greatest success. But Walt Disney wasn't finished dreaming, not even close. Because once he proved that the impossible was possible, he became dangerous. Dangerous to doubt, dangerous to fear, dangerous to anyone who believed dreams had limits. And that's when Walt Disney made another decision. A decision so risky that people believed he had lost his mind. He decided to create the world's first full-length animated feature film. Everyone told him not to do it. Everyone said audiences would never sit through a feature-length cartoon.
Investors doubted him, experts laughed at him, the industry called it Disney's folly. Think about that. The project that would eventually change cinema forever was called a foolish mistake before it was ever completed. What would you do if the entire world believed your dream was impossible? Would you stop, or would you continue anyway? Walt Disney chose to continue, and that decision would transform not only his life, but the lives of billions of people around the world. To be continued.
What would you do if the entire world called your dream a disaster before it even existed? Would you listen? Would you protect yourself? Or would you risk everything anyway? Because that's exactly what Walt Disney did. By the early 1930s, Mickey Mouse had become a global sensation. For the first time in his life, Walt Disney had achieved something that many people only dream about: success, money, recognition, respect. Most people would have stopped there. Most people would have protected what they had built. But Walt Disney had never been interested in doing what most people did. He wanted more. Not more money, not more fame, more imagination, more possibility, more magic. And that's when he made one of the most dangerous decisions of his entire life. He decided to create the world's first full-length animated movie. Today, that doesn't sound revolutionary, but imagine hearing that idea in the 1930s. A full-length cartoon movie? 90 minutes of animation? Who would watch that? People laughed. Hollywood laughed. Investors laughed. Even some of Walt's own employees were afraid. They called the project Disney's folly. Think about that phrase, a folly, a foolish dream, a guaranteed failure. Have you ever shared a dream with someone only to watch them smile politely? Not because they believe in you, but because they believe you're going to fail. That's exactly what Walt Disney experienced. But Walt had learned something from failure. Sometimes the people who doubt your dream simply lack the imagination to see your future. And so he continued. He spent everything, and when that wasn't enough, he borrowed more. Then he risked even more. His money disappeared. His resources disappeared. His security disappeared. Everything was placed on one impossible dream. Imagine lying awake at night. The bills are growing. The pressure is unbearable. Your employees depend on you. Your family depend on you. And the entire world believes you're making the biggest mistake of your life. Would you still continue? Walt Disney did, because he believed that if you don't risk failure, you'll never discover greatness. Years passed. The work continued, frame by frame, scene by scene, dream by dream. And finally, in 1937, the impossible became reality. The film was called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Imagine sitting in the theater that night. The lights dim, the audience waits, the world waits, and you realize that everything you've ever worked for depends on what happens next. What would you feel? Fear? Hope? Regret? Perhaps all of them. But then something unbelievable happened. The audience laughed, they cried, they applauded, they were mesmerized. They had never seen anything like it. The movie became a phenomenon, a masterpiece, a historic success. And the project that everyone had called Disney's folly became one of the greatest achievements in entertainment history. Can you imagine that moment?
The same people who once laughed at your dream now stand up and applaud. The same world that doubted you now celebrates you. And perhaps that's one of life's greatest ironies. The dreams that change history often look ridiculous before they become reality. Snow White transformed Walt Disney, not just financially, not just professionally. It transformed the way the world thought about imagination itself. But success created a new problem, because once you've achieved the impossible once, people expect you to do it again. And Walt Disney wasn't finished chasing impossible dreams. In fact, his greatest dream had not yet been built. To be continued.
What happens when you achieve the impossible? Do you finally rest? Do you finally feel satisfied? Or do you dream even bigger? Because that's exactly what happened to Walt Disney. After the incredible success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Walt Disney became one of the most respected creators in the world. The man who had once been fired for lacking imagination had just changed the future of entertainment. Think about that. The very thing people said he didn't have became the thing that made him legendary. But Walt Disney wasn't interested in proving people wrong anymore. He was interested in proving that imagination had no limits. And that's what made him different. Most people dream until they succeed. Walt Disney succeeded so that he could dream even more. Over the next several years, Walt created film after film. Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi. Each one was a risk. Each one was an experiment. Each one was another attempt to create something the world had never seen before. But success doesn't protect you from hardship, and life was about to test Walt Disney once again. Then came World War II. The world changed. The economy changed. The entertainment industry changed. Disney Studios struggled. Financial pressure returned. Fear returned. Uncertainty returned. Imagine spending your entire life fighting to build something extraordinary, only to watch circumstances beyond your control threaten everything. Would you stop? Would you finally say, "I've done enough"? Walt Disney never thought that way, because he understood something that most people don't. Success isn't something you achieve. It's something you continue building. And that's when Walt Disney had another impossible dream. Not a movie, not a character, not a television show, an entire world. Imagine telling people that you wanted to build a place where families could escape reality, a place filled with imagination, adventure, hope, magic. A place where children and adults could dream together. People thought Walt Disney had lost his mind again. They called it unrealistic, too expensive, too risky. Sound familiar? It should, because every great dream sounds impossible at first. Walt secretly purchased land in California. He invested money. He invested time, he invested belief, and perhaps most importantly, he invested his reputation. Because if this dream failed, everyone would remember it. Have you ever risked everything for an idea? Not because you knew it would succeed, but because you couldn't live with yourself if you never tried.
That's how Walt Disney felt. He wasn't building an amusement park. He was building hope. He was building imagination. He was building a place that reflected everything he had learned from failure. And then, in 1955, something extraordinary happened. Disneyland opened. The dream became real. Families entered a world unlike anything they had ever experienced. Children smiled, parents cried, people believed in magic again. And once again, Walt Disney had done what the world said was impossible. Can you imagine standing there, looking at Disneyland, remembering the bankruptcy, remembering the rejection, remembering being told you had no imagination, and realizing that every failure had led to this moment? But Walt Disney wasn't finished dreaming, because for dreamers like Walt, there is always another impossible dream waiting on the horizon. And perhaps his greatest lesson was only now becoming clear. To be continued.
What is the difference between a successful person and a legend? Is it money? Is it fame? Is it building an empire? Or is it something much deeper? Because if there's one person who understood the true power of dreams, it was Walt Disney. Today, billions of people know the Disney name. They know the movies, the castles, the theme parks, the characters, the magic. But most people don't know the young man who was fired because he supposedly lacked imagination. Most people don't know the entrepreneur who went bankrupt. Most people don't know the dreamer who lost everything and had to start over. And perhaps that's why Walt Disney's story matters so much. Because his story isn't really about Disney. It's about belief. Think about it. What if Walt Disney had believed the people who told him he wasn't creative? What if he had quit after bankruptcy? What if he had accepted that Mickey Mouse was impossible? What if he had listened when everyone called Snow White a disaster? What if he had abandoned Disneyland because it was too risky? There would be no Disney, no Magic Kingdom, no childhood memories shared by billions of people, no empire, no legend. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. The world often rejects ideas before it celebrates them. The world often laughs before it applauds. The world often doubts before it believes. And that's why dreamers must learn something extraordinary. You cannot borrow belief from other people. You must create it yourself. Walt Disney understood this. Every failure taught him something. Every rejection strengthened him. Every setback forced him to dream bigger. Because sometimes life doesn't destroy your dream. Sometimes it prepares you for a greater one. Have you ever felt like you were falling behind? Like everyone else understood something that you didn't? Like your dream was taking too long? Walt Disney understood that feeling. He spent years struggling, years failing, years wondering if success would ever come, but he kept moving. And perhaps that's the real secret of every great success story. Not talent, not luck, not timing, persistence, the willingness to continue when stopping would be easier. Today, Disney is one of the most recognized brands on earth. Its stories have inspired generations. Its characters have become part of human culture. Its magic has touched billions of lives. But perhaps Walt Disney's greatest creation wasn't Mickey Mouse. It wasn't Disneyland. It wasn't even the Disney Empire itself.
perhaps his greatest creation was hope. The hope that imagination matters, the hope that failure doesn't define us, the hope that impossible dreams can become reality. And maybe that's why people still remember him decades later. Not because he built a company, but because he built belief. So, if you're struggling right now, if people doubt you, if you've failed, if you've lost everything, if you're wondering whether your dream is worth fighting for, remember Walt Disney. Remember the man who was told he had no imagination. Remember the man who lost his company. Remember the man who refused to stop dreaming. Because every castle begins as an idea. Every empire begins as a risk. Every legend begins with a dream. And every legend started from zero. Perhaps your greatest dream is still waiting to be built.